Friends, foes, fellow degenerates alike, today we celebrate the momentous occasion of Kafka. Far and away the most popular character in Honkai Star Rail, Kafka is one of, if not the most anticipated banner we have so far, and many are hoping that she's at the very least close to being top tier as possible just so we don't have to choose between Waifu over meta and can get both. The Stellaron Hunters have more than proven themselves as top contenders, with Silver Wolf claiming the crown of the best debuffer in the game, and Blade being, albeit with a good amount of investment, every bit Sealess equal. Each of them have also managed to fill in a part of the roster that was empty before, but with how many lightning units the game has right now, especially just having recently come off of Jingyuan's release, it might be more difficult to justify pulling for her. That is, if we disregard personal preference. Obviously you should pull for who you like over anything else. That being said, in a similar fashion to Bladey, Kafka has her own niche that allows her to excel in the right circumstances. In some ways, that niche can contribute to more lasting relevance even if better characters are released, while in others, it can be an acquired taste. But more importantly, just like Silver Wolf and Blade, she taps into a specific mechanic in Star Rail's combat that adds considerable depth to her long-term viability. So without further ado, let's find out if she's as strong as she is hot. Right out the gate, for those of you wondering if she's worth your Stellar Jades, casting aside all bias, it's a yes, but with a big asterisk and a lot of fine print at the bottom. You won't regret pulling for her, that much is certain, but it will take some work to get her situated, certainly more than her cohorts. Blade's niche is that he's all about self-inflicted damage, storing it to deal damage. The obvious building implication is that you need someone who can regenerate him faster than he kills himself. Silver Wolf's niche, if we even want to call it that, is that she can concentrate multiple debuffs on a single opponent and give them an elemental weakness they didn't have before. The only caveat is that you have no agency over which element is applied. In practice, neither conditions get in the way of their viability because they're accessible enough, which is the idea. You want a character to be situational to stand out from their peers without that situational nature getting in the way of practical results. Kafka's playstyle is noticeably more specialized than Silver Wolf or Blade, which is some people questioning if she's a must-have. DPS units are seldom must-haves. Anyone who kills things is fair game, whereas supports are more difficult to replace. This makes her a rather unorthodox character. Kafka's the nihility unit. One would think she takes more of a backseat and supports her team, but not so actually. She's more of a carry than a support. It's just the way she carries happens to be through a lot of debuffs, or in other words, that's where the main source of her damage is derived from. She's more of a breaker than a traditional attacker, if that makes sense. Kafka's MO revolves around taking damage over time and applying its effects instantly. Dot abilities in RPGs tend to deal a lot of damage under the condition that it takes a while for it to fully apply. What she does is go Amazon same-day delivery on that damage. Her skill's a blast attack, dealing lightning damage to the main target and a similar amount to adjacent enemies. If said targets are currently receiving damage over time, a portion of the total damage is immediately applied on that target. It's important to note though that she doesn't consume the remaining amount of damage that has yet to be afflicted. So instead of Amazon same-day delivery, buy one get one free is a better analogy for it. Basically, say you have 1000 fire damage across 3 turns, 1000 wind damage across 3 turns, and 1000 physical damage across 3 turns. Kafka's skill will deal her own damage plus 750 of each at rank 10, right then and there. So for every dot you stack on a single target, the more damage Kafka deals. This can be from any source. It can be character applied damage over time such as Sampa, Luca, Serval, what have you, or it can be damage over time applied from weakness break. As for her ultimate, it's an amplified version of her skill, damaging all enemies, applying shock to them, and instantly applying 100% of that shock to all enemies. Now based on the description, one might assume this is a straight up weaker version of her skill due to only proccing her own shock damage, but when unlocking her Ascension passive Torture, her ultimate becomes exactly like her skill, immediately applying damage from all dot sources, not just the built-in shock, significantly magnifying the damage of her ultimate. Basically, Kafka turns damage over time into instant damage, which can be exceptionally powerful if given the right team. Her affinity for augmenting the damage of other units has a beneficial side effect, tons of breaking variety. Ordinarily for current meta teams, unless you're itemizing towards break effect on your supports and they're attacking often, you won't trigger weakness break that fast. But Kafka stacks break effect on herself, and with her other 2 slots also consisting of damage dealers, either she or they will rapidly chip away at the enemy's toughness meter, in turn setting off weakness break more frequently, and in turn making subsequent attacks even more powerful since there's more damage over time on them. And this is where her damage can really skyrocket. Her first passive trace, as mentioned above, makes it so her ultimate gets to re-trigger every single dot source, not just a shock state, a huge increase in TPS. So if you combine her skill and burst in tandem with one another, you get to double proc her and her team's dot effects. Alongside that, once per turn, whenever one of her teammates' basic attacks, her talent has her launching a follow-up attack that applies shock equivalent to the strength of her ultimate shock, and if you have her first and second Eidolon, she amplifies the damage over time of that follow-up and of all sources respectively. Speaking of application, that's also her technique, a first strike ability that shocks all enemies upon entering battle. One convenient aspect of this is that, as you know, damage over time isn't affected by crit rate or crit damage, meaning building her in terms of artifacts and whatnot is a lot less stringent than your traditional DPS characters who need to min-max in those departments. To max out her own damage, you don't have to mull over crit value, which is a huge deal, more than you think. Basically all you need on her is attack and speed, that's it. Maybe some effective rate for good measure. This makes her ironically one of the easiest units to gear up at a minimum level, although for the tryhard gamers out there, you're going to want to max out her speed as much as humanly possible since her damage is directly tied to how many turns you get with her more than her peers. Bottom line, she's not as grind heavy when it comes to gearing up, and I'm very glad that's the case considering you'll have to grind to gear up the rest of her party too. Kafka's niche is a very specific one, but very strong in the right circumstances. It's also what allows her to potentially outlast conventional DPS characters like Blade and Seela. While she can apply her own lightning damage over time very easily, for best efficiency you want to have as many other sources of damage over time as possible. At present, the best team we have for her right now I believe is with Sampo, another character with a heavy emphasis on dot, a healer or tank that goes without saying, and some other dot dealer like the new Luca that came out alongside her. The obvious immediate downside of Kafka's playstyle is that you're limited to very specific units, chiefly those that damage over time. Unless you count Silverwolf's breaking ability, the only units who focus on damage over time are 4 stars. Now technically Himeko has a burn, but she doesn't specialize in it, so your choices are few and far between. Don't get me wrong though, Silverwolf is still one of her best teammates for obvious reasons. However, if in the near future we get units with more powerful damage over time, Kafka will take their strength, amplify it even further and make it her own, so she gets indirectly buffed each time another character with damage over time comes out. And there's a lot of potential in this department as evident by there not being 5-star dot specialists besides her. But don't worry about her current lack of selection. On their own, given that both have good relics, her base damage is comparable to Jingyuan's, already a good sign since he's her main competition at the moment. But with 2 fully geared up dot specialists like Sampo and Luca or Serval, her damage ceiling can surpass Blade's. Well, I guess it's not really her damage ceiling, it's her plus the other 2, but point being, even on release, she's broken and has the capacity to be even more broken as time goes on. I think the reason people have mixed feelings on her in terms of in-game use is because damage over time is still an unexplored frontier and not everyone might be a fan of the need to spec directly into that kind of playstyle, at least until we see how powerful it is. Of course, 90% of players going after her are doing so for non-gameplay reasons if you know what I mean, but for those who are looking at her strictly from a pragmatic standpoint, it can appear inefficient to go out of your way to construct a team based on damage over time, especially if you don't have any of those characters geared up prior. Now, having tested her out in Memory of Chaos, Echo of War, and your typical grinding spots, I don't actually think that Kafka's that restrictive, yet at the same time I can see why people view her that way. Let me explain. On one hand, she's restrictive in that while her own damage output is in line with everyone else, if you really want to get the most out of her, you'll need at least one other party member who also deals damage over time. Chances are those dot specialists are not supports, which means not everyone has them geared up, so you can't take your entourage of Tingyun, Bronya, Silverwolf, Japard, Luocha and whatnot and copy paste them into Kafka and make it work. She needs other characters. On the other hand, one advantage that she has that can't be overlooked is the breaking flexibility I talked about before. Hypothetically, a team revolving around Seela, Blade, Jinyu and what have you will mandate all supports to boost their damage. Said supports probably don't attack nearly as often as damage dealers given they spend turns buffing the main carry. Kafka's ability to increase all dot damage allows you to pretty much field anyone you want so long as they specialize in damage over time. You can do Kafka, Sampo, Luca for lightning, wind, and physical. You can do Kafka, Luca, Hook for lightning, physical, fire. Sampo and Hook for lightning, wind, and fire. All kinds of combinations based on the enemy you're up against. It will take investment to gear all those units up, but you can flex any dot specialist of any element and she will weaponize them all the same. Another contradictory aspect is the nature of gearing her up. On one hand, you'll have to invest in other units if you want to make her stronger, subsequently increasing the investment ceiling for a team focused on her. But on the other hand, she's a lot less demanding in terms of relics because you don't need crit stats, since damage over time is not affected by them, therefore lowering the investment floor for a team centered around her. In a way, for my Genshin players out there, Kafka's playstyle is very reminiscent of Nilou's, where you need a pretty specific team to really squeeze out the absolute most of her pressure. But the payoff in damage is so unbelievably good and has the potential to get even better since that damage ceiling is not endemic to her but her team in totality. Though fortunately, unlike Nilou, Kafka's entire kit doesn't shut down if you don't have a team specialized in damage over time. If you so choose, you can run her with Blade for the hell of it and she will at worst not be dead weight. In fact, a headcanon conspiracy I have is that they gave her the follow-up after an ally basic attack just to make her synergize with Bladey, who empowers his basic attack. I wouldn't put it past them. Kafka is a very paradoxical character. She's niche, yet more future-proof than the quote-unquote all-purpose characters. I really enjoy how they designed her. In fact, I like how they designed all the Stellaron hunters. They basically take unconventional approaches to things. Silverwolf takes an unconventional approach with her ability to apply custom weakness breaks, Blade turns his own damage into power, and Kafka's a hyper carry that uses damage over time as her vehicle for DPS instead of just regular damage. The only way I see her getting screwed over is if they don't release more characters that specialize in damage over time, but with how ubiquitous the mechanic appears to be, especially with weakness breaks and whatnot, I don't think that's gonna happen. Kafka's niche, but not too niche. I think she'll receive a lot of support as time goes on. Personally, I find her fun. I don't like Sampo as a person or as a character, but she makes him actually kind of enjoyable to use. Make of that what you will. With all that said, I wish everyone luck in pulling for her, but as always, waifu over meta, pull her because mommy, not because hyper carry. Hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Let me know your thoughts on Kafka in the comments down below, whether you plan to get her or not. Apart from that, I would appreciate it if you left a like and subscribed. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other Star Rail character videos if you haven't yet. But for now, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.